Oh, and good evening. It's August 12th, 2025, and we're continuing our discussion collection and our Outside the Class series. Because this series is from the Bible Project. It covers the entire TaNaK, also known as the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. All of those source videos, they're available for your review on TheDustyFeet.com in the Outside the Class section. Because the intent of Outside the Class is for you to listen to the in-class lecture first, read the story. These we try to keep to about 15 minutes. Easy to catch up on. So we're on a quest, scroll by scroll, book by book, a journey through this collection, but maybe with hopefully a fun and different twist. Our hope with the Dusty Feed is to foster discussion and help build and support communities. If you are not already connected to a community or just want to share and interact, this community has 4 primary ways to interact. 1. DustyFeet.com. That's our primary place to find everything. You are always free to comment. 2. Facebook, at the Dusty Feet. These videos and other videos are also available for comment and discussion. And 3. We have a Discord channel. The invite link is there below. Be vocal, be written, be loving. And 4. And as always, you are welcome to send an email to bob@thedustyfeet.com. These places, they will be moderated, and guidelines will be set to ensure healthy, safe discussion. And as always on the Dusty Feet, this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God and the interconnection of His creation. Belief understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. And of course, before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, please click that subscribe button. The reminders, they're just there to help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, that is when you click that like button, because it is how YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. Because in this series, we're going to cover the entire TaNaK, the Old Testament, but we're going to do it in the original order of the Hebrew Scriptures. We just need to remember that the videos we're going to be talking about, they're just the tip of an iceberg. They're part of a learning series I highly recommend, and all of them can be found on the Bible Project website. Because we're going to ask many questions about all kinds of things. Answers? We'll see. So, Samuel, we're on part 17, towards the end of 17, and David picks up his walking stick. David, on his walk, finds 5 smooth stones nearby and chooses one. Ones that will fit well in his particular device, right? The one is the sling, because he knows what he wants to do. Picks up 5 stones. Looks for the best one. I love the stories that wrap around this. People ponder and they postulate and think, you know what? Reading into the 5 stones, what did the other stones do, right? There were 5. All of this is speculation. But then, to be fair, we like to fill in many blanks with other things that we think. Hence, it's to be fair, it's not to be judgmental in any way with somebody else's thought choices in the story. It's more about, I think we just need to remember what we do know in the story so that we don't have our own story, as we mentioned twice before, of the bit of embellishment. Maybe this will be thrice of embellishment, one way or the other. We just know David picked up some extra stones. Then the Philistine came on and approached David with the shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy, with a handsome appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And there's one little tiny interesting thing in reading this that caught me this time when I read through it. To be fair, I hadn't caught it until looking at it this time. I decided to study it. May not be big, but it helped me remind me to reread a story sometimes, because maybe I'd missed something. That something might be significant, it might not. However, it reminds me that I still do miss things. Then the Philistine came on and approached David with the shield bearer in front of him. I think most of us probably picture the Philistine, this giant already standing there, and David marching up to him defiantly. This is the typical way the story's often portrayed in movies, although in those moving pictures. But this one suggests that David got there first on the scene. The Philistine approaches David, almost as if David walks up and stops. He's in this span between the two armies, one on one side, one on the other. They can all see each other. These guys are camped out. They can see each other, and this is what's happening. They're in this DMZ between, right, where the battle's going to take place, and David wanders out, standing there. The Philistine steps up to David. At least that's what the story says, and yeah, it's the part I missed. David didn't march up to Goliath. Goliath wandered down to David. So Goliath is looking out. He sees this unarmored man as he approaches, as if we're... Okay, so if we're going to go with that, what the sages and the scholars tend to lean towards, right? This is a red-headed man, right? Again, unarmored. Just to make it enjoyable. It says also he's handsome. Maybe that's just a contrast that Goliath was ugly. Who knows that the warriors were not supposed to be handsome men, I don't know. I got no dog in that fight. They just do mention it. But it does say youth. So if we're looking at the story in its totality, that might not be as much a literal statement as, say, a comparative one. You understand what I'm talking about? Instead of him being a kid, because the story isn't playing out that way, from what we know building up to this, I think we don't want to latch onto it that way. I think maybe we need to look at it as comparative. In other words, I'm an experienced warrior with many years under my belt, probably many death notches on my sword. Scratch a little scratch, a hash mark for every person I've killed, and who knows how scratched up Goliath's sword might be. But he's looking at him going, you, unweathered, unwarlike, you have no experience in this arena. You're way out of your league, son. You're nothing compared to me. But from the context of the story we've been reading up to this point, I tend to lean towards this perspective view rather than the literal view that David was a young boy. However, I know we love to latch onto it, and again, our flannel graph stories from growing up in a Baptist church had these. It's just not in the fullness of the story. It doesn't align with it. That's why we read it and reread it. But the Philistine, of course, he takes exception. Goliath says, it's a mockery. You come to me with your walking stick, and he cursed David by his gods, and it's probably the usual way of doing things. You can even hear it today, right? In battle, men curse each other, mocking their opponent's leaders mocking their opponent's leaders. Yeah, it's fair. But then we had this brief interaction with David and the Philistine that interested me. I want to share something with you for a moment because I've come to realize something else. We read a lot of these stories in Scripture, people that God is addressing, that we're talking about those key figures who they're usually named repetitively, right? In other words, you're going to hear their name often, all the time. Those are the people that are important. But when you're not, you might be mentioned once, twice, and then from then on, you're just men, nefarious characters, warriors. They'll mention them. And then they're only either a pronoun or an associative word, meaning we can have a him, his, them, and then we get like the Philistine. That's an associative word. I'm just going to attach you to this. Yep. Goliath, by name. It's only mentioned a few times. It's only mentioned 6 in total in Scripture, right? Even, some of them are associative, even for him, as in they're talking about Goliath's sword. The rest, he's just a Philistine. So it's almost with disdain, right? As if you are nothing more than just one of them, another element in this story. In this story, the focus is on the future king and the God he represents. And I think that ties in the interactive meeting that I was ready to talk about. Verse 44, the Philistine also said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field." But then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the army of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you, and I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth. And all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." So David's response, it counters what the Philistine says, reminding him that God made this call, not him. God made this call, and he made it so that all the earth would know that there is a God in Israel, and that all the earth will know that this God is with Israel. Well, and again, just like the typical movies we hear today, I pictured this taunt back to David as Goliath is speaking it. This causes Goliath to just build rage, right? This causes Goliath to start the charge. Goliath is going with that little twerp, that little speck. That man is standing there in front of me with no armor. He's fuming. He's enraged. And he charges. And again, maybe in the movies, David starts the charge as well. I figured David might be a little more fleet of foot, probably than Goliath anyways. He's a big guy, but he's moving and he's all armored up. David comes head on, dead sprint, reaches into his bag, grabs a stone, puts it in his sling, hits Goliath right between the eyes. Who knows? He might have done that to the lion and the bear. It doesn't say what he used. It does say he tugged on the lion's beard in one of the battles, and there are a bunch of things, though, that are not told in that story. However, David hits him full on with this. It's interesting that you can actually, it's interesting, you can go find a few videos of various people on YouTube. Go take a look. I'm not espousing any particular one, just merely stating that you can see actually where people with this kind of sling, they can do some pretty severe damage. And surprisingly accurate. And you realize, for me anyways, as much of a seasoned warrior as Goliath was, as prodigious as Goliath was, and all of that is true, but in all the years that David's been doing his tasks, his thing, his life, I think he's also become more experienced in what he does. I mean, he's pretty experienced in his skill sets. They're just out in the wilds of the field. They're just protecting sheep. And as we know by his personal war stories, again, we know it's not always the safest place, that David is bold. He's not without skill, as they say, right? I'm not here to say that God does not guide the stone. However, to be fair, there's nothing in this David story that says that David has never done this before, right? David has never, he's never done it. He's never been this bold. He's never held this position. So it's not entirely done without any preparation. Really, in fact, upon examining the story as a whole, it appears that this has been about preparation. This has been leading up to a moment such as this. I'm not sure about the preparation because the thought is, meaning the thought that this kind of thing would pop up in David's head as he's living in the moment, in his future, right? That he may then look back and he can say, oh, maybe that's why I've been through what I've been through. Because all it says is David runs out and he kills it. But also, in case again, like we do seem to read something and sometimes we miss things. Did you realize that David killed him twice? I mean, in Scripture, it mentions killing him, and then it mentions killing him. Verses 50 and 51, right? Thus, David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him. And there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran, stood over the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. Yeah, we remember David didn't have a sword, right? He left all the war implements back in the tent with Saul. So he gets there after hitting him. He reaches, draws out Goliath's sword, cuts off his head. Double dead, I guess, just to make sure. And of course, all the Philistine army is watching this. They panic. They flee. And again, pick a movie, any movie you've seen. And after this one-on-one battle, and their champion loses, and then the other side goes, run away! Run away! I'll let you picture that. Well, the armies of Israel, they pursued the Philistines, right? They killed a whole bunch of people between Ekron and Gath and Shamarim. So there's many bodies that are lying along the road as they chase them back to their strongholds. And true to David's point, plenty of food for the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. David dragged Goliath's head and brought it back to Jerusalem. That's an interesting picture. I'm not sure we're prepared for that. I mean, in the movies we see, the bad guys typically go to the good guys in the story, and we've seen the bad guys putting the heads of their defeated enemies up on spikes in front of their strongholds. Yeah. But I tend to lean towards the idea that David brought this head just to validate the story. I mean, it's suggesting that if there were any rumors, they were based on someone's hearsay, but this was proof that Goliath, that prodigious champion, was in fact dead. The Philistines' leading man, whose head is now in Jerusalem. And you notice David took his armor, put it in his tent? Not sure how to think about that either. I don't know if we should be thinking about it. Just something that stood out for me. Might be worth pondering, might not. Then there's one little part at the end of 17, because it doesn't go with what we know from the rest of the story, or it does go with what we know of the rest of the story. It just reminds us at times that Scripture is not always in order, or the story can jump around. Things are not going to be sequential, because that's not the purpose of the book, to be sequential. It's meant to be a relational story. And in this particular case, we're asked the same question Saul asked David. Who's your dad? Whose son are you, young man? And of course, David answered, I'm the son of your servant, Jesse, the Bethlehemite. We're going to flip the page into 18, and next week we're going to be introduced to the connection between Jonathan, the son of Saul, right? He's the incumbent king. There's discussion worthy that Jonathan should be the next king, except that Samuel said none of those are going to come from you. But Jonathan and David, right? The future king. Yeah? Yeah, there's no possible conflict of interest there. think you can tell I say that tongue in cheek. So thank you for being with us tonight on another episode of Outside the Class with Samuel, the first scroll, as we wrap up Goliath. Now we get ready to get into the very complex story of David and Jonathan on the Dusty Feet.